October 27, 1943, 24,000 feet above Rabaul Harbor, First Lieutenant Daniel Carmichael scanned the sky ahead as his P-38H Lightning hummed through thin air. Both Allison V-17 engines synchronized perfectly, their turbo superchargers muffling the exhaust to a whisper. His wingman held position 300 yards to port. 8 P-38s flew escort for the B-24 Liberators, laboring below at 18,000 feet. Their bomb bays laden with 2,000-pound general-purpose bombs destined for Japanese shipping. Then the radio crackled. Bandits, zeros, 2 o'clock high. Multiple contacts. Carmichael's head snapped right. What he saw made his blood run cold. Not 20 zeros, not 40, 90, maybe more, pouring down from 28,000 feet in a cascading spiral that looked like a swarm of silver hornets. The morning sun glinted off their wings in sequential flashes as they descended. They had altitude, they had numbers, they had position. Everything, tactical doctrine said, determined who lived and who died in aerial combat over the South Pacific. The zero formation split with practiced precision. Half drove toward the bombers. The other half, 45 aircraft in disciplined three-plane sections, rolled inverted and dove directly at Carmichael's flight. The closing speed exceeded 600 miles per hour. Carmichael had perhaps 4 seconds to decide. Follow doctrine. Maintain altitude. Use the P-38 speed advantage. Wait for the zeros to climb back up into firing range. Let them make the first pass, absorb their attack, then counter with the Lightning's superior firepower. Or do the one thing every P-38 pilot had been explicitly forbidden to do since the Lightning entered combat service 20 months earlier, the one maneuver that technical orders prohibited in red capital letters, the maneuver that had killed test pilots and combat pilots alike. The split-S roll inverted, pull into a descending half-loop, follow the zeros, down into the dive where compressibility turned control surfaces into useless metal and the P-38's tail shook itself to pieces at speeds above 450 miles per hour indicated. What happened in the next 90 seconds would either validate 20 months of official prohibition or prove that sometimes doctrine kills more pilots than the enemy. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. By October 1943, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning had been fighting in the Pacific Theater for 16 months. The twin-engine, twin-boom design promised capabilities no single-engine fighter could match: 1,225 horsepower per engine, a top speed of 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, a service ceiling above 40,000 feet. The tricycle landing gear made carrier-style landings unnecessary. They concentrated nose armament, 4 50-caliber Browning machine guns, and 1 20mm Hispano cannon delivered devastating firepower without convergence problems. On paper, the P-38 dominated the Mitsubishi A6M0. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai engine produced only 950 horsepower. Maximum speed topped out at 331 miles per hour. Above 20,000 feet, the lightweight Zero struggled while the turbocharged P-38 thrived. But paper specifications didn't explain why Zeros kept escaping. In the first year of Pacific operations, P-38 pilots reported engagement after engagement where they held every tactical advantage, altitude, speed, position, only to watch their targets dive away and disappear. The problem wasn't the Lightning's speed or firepower. It was the split-S, or rather, the P-38's inability to safely execute it. The split-S was simplicity itself as a maneuver. Roll inverted, 180 degrees, pull back on the control column. The nose falls through the horizon. The aircraft accelerates into a descending half-loop. Exit level flight at lower altitude. Opposite heading. Tremendous speed. For most fighters, it was a standard disengagement tactic. For the P-38, it was suicide. At high speeds, particularly in dives, approaching or exceeding 400 miles per hour, indicated airspeed, the P-38 encountered aerodynamic forces that 1940s engineering barely understood. Compressibility. Shockwaves formed over the wing's thick center section where the cockpit pod met the twin booms. The horizontal stabilizers lost effectiveness. The elevator controls froze. Pilots reported tuck under. The nose pitching down uncontrollably, steeper and steeper, diving faster and faster with no way to pull out. Recovery required altitudes most combat situations didn't allow. If you entered compressibility above 15,000 feet, you might recover, maybe. If you started lower, you impacted the water or the jungle at terminal velocity. No warning, no parachute. Just a smoking crater and a telegram to your family. Lockheed test pilot Ralph Verdon had died in November 1941, testing high-speed dives. His P-38 entered an unrecoverable dive at 20,000 feet. Witnesses reported the controls had simply frozen. The aircraft maintained its dive angle, accelerating, until it impacted the ground at an estimated 550 miles per hour. The Civil Aeronautics Board investigation concluded that compressibility had rendered the controls completely useless above 450 miles per hour indicated. There was nothing Verdon could have done. Lockheed's chief engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson, implemented immediate restrictions. Technical Order 0175 F1 was distributed to every P-38 squadron in every theater. The language was unequivocal. No dives exceeding 400 miles per hour indicated. No prolonged high-speed flight. No combat maneuvers that risk compressibility onset. The Lightning's advantages lay in speed and altitude at moderate dive angles. Use them. Never execute split-S maneuvers. Never attempt to follow diving enemy aircraft into steep descending turns. The risk of losing control exceeds any tactical benefit. Japanese pilots discovered the restriction within months. Intelligence summaries from captured documents showed that 0 pilots received explicit briefings. The twin-engine American fighter will not follow steep dives or inverted maneuvers. Execute split-S when engaged, roll inverted, pull through, dive away. The P-38 cannot follow. Escape is assured. It became standard doctrine throughout the Imperial Japanese Navy fighter units. If a P-38 gained an attacking position, the 0 pilot would execute a split-S, roll, inverted in less than 1 second, pull into the descending half-loop, dive vertically. The P-38 wouldn't follow. The 0 would pull out at low altitude, 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet, wherever the pilot judged safe, and either re-engage from below or withdraw completely. By autumn 1943, the pattern was killing Americans. The 4th 175th Fighter Group reported that 58% of engagements ended with Zeros escaping via split-S maneuvers. The 49th Fighter Group documented 23 separate engagements where P-38s held every tactical advantage only to watch their targets invert, dive, and disappear. Pilots returned to base with full ammunition and empty victory claims. The frustration was corrosive. Major General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, demanded solutions. Lockheed engineers were working on dive recovery flaps, small surfaces that would disrupt the airflow, causing compressibility. But production and installation would take months. The dive flaps wouldn't reach field modifications until late 1943, wouldn't reach factory installation until June 1944. Combat was happening now. Men were dying now. Some pilots ignored the restrictions. They executed split-S maneuvers anyway, rolling inverted and pulling into dives, risking their lives and their aircraft to stay with fleeing Zeros. Most recovered successfully, pulling out at the last possible moment with blackened vision and bleeding eyes from the G-forces. Some didn't. In August 1943, a P-38G from the 39th Fighter Squadron disintegrated at 12,000 feet during a high-speed split-S pursuit. Witnesses reported seeing the horizontal stabilizer separate first, then the entire tail assembly. The fighter tumbled inverted, both engines still running, and impacted the ocean at 490 miles per hour. The pilot had been chasing a Zero that had rolled inverted and dived. He'd followed. He died. The official response was immediate and unequivocal. Court-martial proceedings were initiated against 2 pilots who admitted executing split-S maneuvers in violation of technical orders. The charges were later dropped, but the message was clear: follow procedures, do not deviate. The aircraft's limitations are absolute. The unofficial response, whispered in ready rooms across New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, was different. The Lightning could survive the split-S if you knew how, if you understood where the edge was. If you were willing to bet your life that you understood your aircraft better than the engineers who designed it and the test pilots who died proving its limits. Most pilots weren't willing to take that bet. The doctrine held, Zeros escaped. Americans died. Until October 27th, 1943, when 90 Zeros dove from 28,000 feet and 1 pilot decided doctrine was more dangerous than compressibility. Japanese intelligence assessments from mid-1943 characterized the P-38 as technically advanced but tactically predictable. Captured documents translated after the war revealed the specificity of their understanding. The twin-engine fighter possesses superior speed above 6,000 meters but exhibits extreme reluctance to execute inverted or high-speed descending maneuvers. Pilots consistently refuse to follow split-S escapes, exploit this limitation aggressively. It represents the Lightning's greatest tactical weakness. They weren't wrong. American pilots were reluctant. The reasons were documented in missing aircrew reports and accident investigation files. The split-S wasn't theoretical danger. It killed with mechanical certainty. The physics were unforgiving. Above 400, 20 miles per hour. Indicated, shock waves formed over the wing center section. The horizontal stabilizers, mounted on the tail booms, experienced airflow separation. The elevators, which normally provided pitch control, became aerodynamically useless. Pulling back on the control column did nothing. The aircraft continued diving, nose down, accelerating toward terminal velocity. The Zero, meanwhile, excelled at the split-S. Its lightweight construction, just 5,313 pounds empty compared to the P-38's 12,700 pounds, meant lower wing loading and less aerodynamic stress during high-G maneuvers. The Zero could roll inverted in 0.8 seconds, pull into the descending half-loop, dive vertically from 25,000 feet to 3,000 feet, pull out smoothly with 6 Gs, retain enough energy for immediate re-engagement. Japanese pilots used the tactic with confidence, born from hundreds of successful escapes. Not one P-38 had ever followed them through a split-S. Peace. Not one. What made the situation particularly devastating was the tactical implication. Air superiority requires not just shooting down enemy aircraft, but denying them the ability to accomplish their missions. If Zeros could escape any engagement by executing a split-S, they could always regroup, always return, always threaten bombers and ground forces. The P-38's speed advantage meant nothing if it couldn't force decisive engagement. American pilots tried alternatives. Some attempted to anticipate the Zero's dive and position below the enemy formation. This forfeited the altitude advantage, the Lightning's primary strength. Others tried prolonged tail chases, following Zeros in shallow 30-degree descents, where compressibility was less severe. Zeros could reverse these situations using their superior turning radius at medium speeds. Training emphasized patience and discipline. Maintain altitude, don't chase. Wait for another opportunity. Use the P-38's strengths, speed, climb rate, firepower. Avoid its weaknesses, roll rate. Split-S vulnerability, compressibility limits. Sound advice. Logical tactics. But patience meant watching enemies escape. Discipline meant allowing Zeros to break contact and potentially attack other American formations. The psychological toll mounted. Pilots reported engagement after engagement where they had him but couldn't finish. The Zero would be in their sights, 300 yards, 200 yards, perfect firing position. Then the Zero would snap inverted, pull into the split-S, and dive vertically into the clouds or toward the jungle canopy. The P-38 would hold altitude. The pilot would watch his target disappear. Another escape. Another frustration. Another day where the enemy lived to fight again. By October 1943, the 475th Fighter Group, Daniel Carmichael's unit, had lost 6 pilots to Zeros. That had initially been at a disadvantage. The pattern was consistent. P-38 achieved favorable position through altitude or speed. Zero executed split S. P-38 declined to follow per technical orders. Zero escaped, repositioned, attacked from unexpected angle. 2 pilots died from stern attacks they never saw coming. 3 died when damaged aircraft couldn't maintain altitude. 1 ditched at sea and drowned before rescue arrived. Pilots were dying, not because the Lightning was inferior, but because doctrine prevented them from pressing advantages. The restriction made sense from an engineering perspective. Compressibility killed. The numbers proved it. But the restriction also made sense from the enemy's perspective. If American fighters wouldn't follow split S maneuvers, Japanese fighters enjoyed guaranteed escape from any engagement. That was its own kind of death sentence. Slower, more uncertain, but equally fatal. What the Japanese didn't know was that some American pilots were experimenting. Off-the-record test dives, careful exploration of the compressibility envelope. They discovered something the technical orders didn't mention. The P-38 could survive higher speeds than officially permitted. It could execute steeper dives than the manuals allowed. The margins were razor-thin, measured in miles per hour and degrees of dive angle. But they existed. The technique spread through informal networks. Experienced pilots shared details in hushed conversations after debriefings, never in official channels. How to feel the control column stiffening as compressibility approached. How to use trim tabs to maintain some pitch authority when the elevators froze. How to recognize tuck under before it became unrecoverable. How to begin recovery early enough, high enough to avoid impact. How to bet your life on measurements and feelings instead of technical orders written by engineers who'd never faced 90 zeros diving from altitude. None of it was official, all of it was forbidden. Some of it was wrong. Pilots died testing theories, but some theories worked. And knowledge, even forbidden knowledge, spreads when survival depends on it. On October 26, 1943, Daniel Carmichael had executed his first split S into combat. A single Zero had bounced his wingman from above. Carmichael had altitude advantage, but the Zero was already diving away. Standard doctrine said let him go. Carmichael rolled inverted instead, pulled into the descending half loop, followed the Zero down through 18,000, 15,000, 12,000 feet. His airspeed hit 430 miles per hour indicated. The controls stiffened. He felt tuck under beginning. He used nose-up trim. The dive angle decreased from 65 degrees to 55 degrees. Still steep, still dangerous, but controllable. He closed to 200 yards, fired a 3-second burst. The Zero exploded. Carmichael pulled out at 8,000 feet with 7 Gs and temporary vision loss. When his sight returned, he was alive. His aircraft was intact. His wingman was safe. And 1-0 wouldn't threaten bombers again. He didn't report the split S in his combat narrative, neither did his wingman. The official record stated, engaged enemy aircraft in high-speed pursuit achieved kill through superior positioning. True, as far as it went. Incomplete where it mattered. But the next morning, October 27th, when 90 Zeros appeared above Rabul, Carmichael wasn't thinking about technical orders or court-martial proceedings. He was thinking about 8 P-38s and 16 bomber crews depending on him. Sometimes doctrine is more dangerous than the enemy. Sometimes survival requires breaking the rules designed to keep you safe. Daniel Carmichael didn't ask permission. There wasn't time. The Zero formation split like a breaking wave, half rolling toward the bombers below, half screaming toward his flight from 28,000 feet. He keyed his radio. All flights, split by sections, engage high group, stay above 400 indicated. Then he did exactly what he'd just told his pilots not to do. He snapped the control column left. The P-38 rolled inverted in 1.2 seconds, slower than a Zero but fast enough. The world flipped. Sky became ground. Ground became sky. He was hanging in his harness, negative G-force pulling blood toward his head. He pulled back on the control column. Back, in the inverted position, meant down. The nose fell through the horizon. Both throttles went to war emergency power. The Allison engines roared, turbo superchargers spooling up with a rising shriek that would have been deafening if anyone could hear over the wind noise. The P-38 accelerated into a descending half-loop, the split S, the forbidden maneuver, the dive that killed test pilots and violated every technical order ever written for the Lightning. Airspeed indicator 280 miles per hour, climbing. Carmichael held the dive angle at 60 degrees. His wingman, Second Lieutenant James Keller, hesitated for 2 seconds, then followed. The rest of the flight held altitude. Doctrine dictated dispersal and mutual support, not aggressive pursuit into potentially fatal dives. Carmichael didn't blame them. They were following orders. He was about to die for proving those orders wrong, or prove that sometimes orders kill you faster than the enemy. At 22,000 feet, Carmichael was indicating 390 miles per hour. The controls began to stiffen. He felt it through the yoke, a subtle resistance, as if he were pushing through cold syrup instead of air. This was the edge. Technical order 0175F1 said, "Stop, roll upright, abandon the pursuit." Carmichael kept the dive angle. The Zeros ahead weren't evading yet. They were diving toward the bombers at 18,000 feet, following their standard doctrine. Dive through the escort, attack the bombers, execute split S if engaged. They hadn't seen the P-38 diving behind them, or they assumed, based on 20 months of experience and hundreds of successful escapes, that it wouldn't continue. The Americans never followed the split S. Never. It was as reliable as the sunrise. At 19,000 feet, Carmichael was indicating 420 miles per hour. The control column felt locked. He pushed harder. Nothing. The aircraft wanted to continue diving exactly as it was. No pitch change. No turn, just a 60-degree plunge toward the ocean 4 miles below. This was compressibility. This was what killed Ralph Verdon. This was the edge where physics stopped caring about what pilots wanted. Tuck under was beginning. The nose wanted to drop further. The dive angle was increasing, 60 degrees to 62 degrees to 64 degrees. In 5 more seconds, the angle would reach 70 degrees. In 10 seconds, vertical. After that, no amount of altitude would save him. The P-38 would accelerate until something structural failed. The tail, the wings, the engine mounts, and the aircraft would disintegrate at 480 miles per hour with Carmichael still strapped inside. He reached for the trim wheel with his left hand, rolled it back, nose-up trim. The horizontal stabilizers, still effective at the tail booms despite the airflow separation, provided leverage the frozen elevators couldn't. The dive angle decreased to 61 degrees. Not much. Enough. He was still diving, still accelerating, but the nose wasn't dropping further. He had trim authority. He had control. Barely. At 16,000 feet, he was behind and above the Zero formation. They were pulling out, transitioning from their dive into level flight at 14,000 feet, preparing to attack the B-24s plodding along at 180 miles per hour, 45 Zeros converging on 8 bombers. The mathematics were brutal. Without fighter protection, the bombers would be slaughtered. Carmichael's airspeed 450 miles per hour indicated, 20 miles per hour into compressibility, 30 miles per hour past the technical order limit. He was in the forbidden zone, the place where test pilots died, where combat pilots disintegrated, where the Lightning stopped being an aircraft and became a falling object. He selected the nearest Zero. The Japanese pilot was pulling out of his dive, nose rising, bead bleeding off as he transitioned to level flight. He never looked back. Why would he? Americans didn't follow split S dives. It was doctrine. It was certainty. It was survival. At 450 miles per hour, Carmichael closed the distance in 3 seconds. The Zero filled his windscreen. He pressed the trigger. 4 50-caliber Brownings and 1 20mm cannon fired. The combined rate of fire exceeded 2,000 rounds per minute. The concentrated nose mounting meant every round flew true. No convergence calculations, no wing-mounted guns firing at angles, just a stream of metal and high explosive directly where the gun sight pointed. The Zero's fuselage disintegrated, not damaged, not holed, disintegrated. Pieces spun away, Fabric, aluminum, something that might have been the canopy or might have been the pilot. Carmichael couldn't identify the debris. The Zero rolled inverted and fell in pieces. No parachute, no recovery, just wreckage tumbling toward the jungle below. Carmichael's speed was too high. He flashed past the disintegrating Zero and hurtled into the formation. A second Zero appeared directly ahead, the pilot just beginning to register the P-38's impossible presence. Carmichael's finger was still on the trigger. The burst lasted less than 1 second. 20 rounds. The Zero's right wing separated at the root. The fighter snap-rolled left and went down, trailing fuel and smoke. The formation exploded in all directions. Zeros broke left, right, up, down. Every pilot seeking separation from the threat that had appeared from nowhere at impossible speed, doing the impossible maneuver. The Americans didn't follow split S-dives. But here was one. Behind them. Among them. Faster than any Zero could achieve in level flight. Carmichael's indicated airspeed 440 miles per hour. He was still faster than any Zero could fly straight and level. He pulled both throttles back to 70% power. The engines spooled down. Airspeed began decreasing. At 410 miles per hour, the controls loosened. He had authority again. The elevator responded to inputs. He pulled into a climbing left turn, trading excess speed for altitude. 2 kills. 90 seconds elapsed since the dive began. A Zero crossed his nose at 15,000 feet, 600 yards ahead, climbing desperately. Carmichael rolled right, pulled lead, calculating deflection by instinct and experience. Fired. The Zero's cockpit shattered. The aircraft nosed over and went down. 3. His wingman, Lieutenant Keller, recovered from his own split-S dive at 13,000 feet. His voice came through the radio, strained, breathing hard from G-forces. "Lead, you're into them. I'm covering high." Keller positioned above and behind, watching for counterattacks. The younger pilot had followed Carmichael through the forbidden maneuver. He'd survived. His P-38 was intact. Doctrine said they should both be dead. Reality said they were killing Zeros. Carmichael spotted 3 Zeros attempting to regroup at 12,000 feet. They were slow, maybe 280 miles per hour, reforming after the chaos of watching 2 wingmen explode and an American fighter appear where no American fighter should be. He didn't split S this time. No need. He dove at 30 degrees, keeping his speed below 400 miles per hour, retaining control. He closed to 300 yards. Fired. The trailing Zero erupted in flames, not smoke. Flames. The Nakajima radial engine and unprotected fuel tanks ignited simultaneously. The fighter became a fireball in less than 2 seconds. 4. The pilot bailed out, trailing fire, his parachute deployed, burning. Carmichael looked away. Some things you didn't need to see twice. The second Zero broke hard right, a classic evasion maneuver. At 320 miles per hour, Carmichael's P-38 couldn't match the turn radius. The Zero could turn inside him. Reverse position, gain the advantage. Standard tactical doctrine said, break off, extend, use speed to separate. Carmichael climbed instead, rolled inverted at 14,000 feet, pulled into another split S. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Zero was still turning, bleeding energy in the tight circle, trying to reverse onto Carmichael's tail. Impossible. The P-38 was diving again, accelerating, 340 miles per hour, 370, 400. Carmichael used trim to control the dive angle, 45 degrees, manageable. The Zero pilot saw him coming, tried to roll inverted for his own split S escape. Too slow, too late. Carmichael fired from a 30-degree deflection angle, leading the target by instinct. The Zero's engine cowling shattered, smoke poured out, black and oily. The aircraft descended in a glide toward the ocean. The pilot was still alive, fighting for control, trying to nurse the damaged fighter back to Rabul. He wouldn't make it. At 10,000 feet, Carmichael spotted a Zero attacking a B-24. The Japanese pilot was making a head-on pass, closing at combined speed exceeding 500 miles per hour. The bomber's nose guns were firing, dozens of 50 caliber tracers streaming forward in converging lines. The Zero flew through them like they weren't there, guns flashing, 20mm shells striking the bomber's nose, the bombardier's position, the navigator's station. Men were dying in that bomber. Then the Zero tried to break away, pulling up and right, trying to avoid flying into the bomber's vertical stabilizer. Standard head-on attack procedure, fire, brake, reposition. Carmichael was above and behind. He rolled into a split S for the third time. Inverted, nose down, dive. The maneuver that killed test pilots, the maneuver he'd now executed 3 times in 90 seconds. He rolled upright at 11,000 feet and pulled lead on the climbing zero. The deflection was severe, 45 degrees, requiring precise aim and instinct for where the target would be when the bullets arrived. He fired. The Zero's tail disintegrated. The aircraft tumbled, gyrating wildly, pieces of elevator and rudder spinning away. 6. His ammunition counters 20mm at 52%, 50 caliber at 38%. He'd been firing in short bursts, 1 second, 2 seconds maximum. Conservation was critical, but the discipline was paying off. 6 confirmed kills, 3 split S maneuvers, 90 seconds of combat, and he was still alive. 3 Zeros appeared below at 9,000 feet, heading west away from the fight. Running. Smart. The engagement was chaos. The Americans who weren't supposed to follow split S dives were doing exactly that. Better to withdraw, regroup, attack another day. Carmichael dove after them. Not a split S, just a normal 30-degree dive. Speed building to 390 miles per hour. He closed on the trailing Zero. Range 250 yards. He fired. The Zero didn't explode, it simply stopped flying. The fuselage buckled amidships. The wings folded upward. The tail separated. The wreckage tumbled. 7. 75 seconds of combat, 7 confirmed kills, 3 split S maneuvers, and Daniel Carmichael was rewriting the tactical manual for the P-38 Lightning with every burst of gunfire. The other 2, Zero split. Carmichael followed the right-hand aircraft. The Zero pilots saw him, glanced back over his shoulder, and did exactly what doctrine said to do. He rolled, inverted, pulled into a split S, dove vertically toward the jungle 4,000 feet below, the maneuver that had worked for 20 months, the guaranteed escape, the tactical certainty. Carmichael rolled inverted and followed. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio. "Laid, don't, you're too low." Keller was right. Carmichael was at 9,000 feet. A split S dive would take him below 5,000 feet, maybe lower depending on how far the Zero ran before pulling out. Low altitude, high speed, compressibility. If something went wrong, there wouldn't be enough altitude to recover. One mistake, one moment of tuck under he couldn't correct, and he'd impact the jungle at terminal velocity. He pulled into the split S anyway. The nose fell through the horizon. Both engines at war emergency power, the dive angle 60 degrees, airspeed 340 miles per hour climbing. The Zero was below him, diving vertically now, 7,000 feet, 6,500, 6,000. The Japanese pilot was committed. Full vertical dive, maximum speed. The P-38 couldn't follow this. Everyone knew it. 20 months of combat experience proved it. Carmichael's airspeed 430 miles per hour. Compressibility stiffened the controls. He used trim, aggressive nose-up inputs. The Zero pulled out at 4,000 feet, sharp 6G recovery, leveling off and turning hard left. Carmichael was 3,000 feet behind and 2,000 feet above, closing. The Zero pilot looked back again, saw the P-38, saw it following through the split S dive that shouldn't be possible. The expression on the pilot's face, visible for just an instant through the mirror-like reflection of the canopy, was pure disbelief. The Zero attempted a hard left turn, too slow. Energy depleted from the pullout. Carmichael fired at 300 yards range. The Zero's wing buckled. It rolled inverted and impacted the jungle canopy at 280 miles per hour. The explosion sent a column of black smoke rising into the morning air. 8. His altitude 3,500 feet. His fuel 47%. His ammunition 20mm at 38%. 50 caliber at 21%. 1 Zero was climbing back toward the fight at 10,000 feet. Carmichael turned into it. The Japanese pilot saw the P-38, made his decision instantly. Rolled inverted, pulled into a split S, dove toward the ocean. Carmichael followed for the 5th time. Inverted, nose down, dive. The maneuver was becoming automatic now, muscle memory replacing thought. Roll at 180 degrees per second. Pull at the moment of inversion. Monitor airspeed. Watch for compressibility. Use trim when controls stiffen. Begin recovery early. Trust the aircraft. Trust the technique. Trust that the engineers were wrong about the limits. The Zero was diving toward the ocean, visible 7 miles to the south. Carmichael closed to 300 yards. 250, 200, fired. The Zero's fuselage stitched with impacts, 50 caliber rounds and 20 millimeter shells walking from tail to nose. It nosed over steeper and hit the water at 320 miles per hour. The impact threw up a geyser of white spray. 9. Elapsed time since the first engagement, 92 seconds. When Daniel Carmichael landed at Kirrawina Airfield on Trobriand Islands 110 minutes later, his crew chief counted the expended ammunition. The 20-millimeter cannon, 142 rounds fired. The 50 caliber machine guns, 673 rounds combined, total 815 rounds to destroy 9 confirmed enemy aircraft, an average of 90 rounds per kill. The Lightning's effectiveness, when employed without the restrictions that doctrine imposed, exceeded every tactical prediction. But the ammunition was secondary. What intelligence officers wanted to understand was the split S. Carmichael's flight recorder showed his maximum indicated airspeed, 451 miles per hour. The technical order prohibited split S maneuvers entirely and restricted all dives above 400 miles per hour. Carmichael had exceeded the dive speed limit by 51 miles per hour and executed the forbidden maneuver 5 separate times in 92 seconds. He'd survived. His aircraft was intact, all control surfaces functional, no structural damage, no compressibility-induced failures, 9 enemy fighters destroyed, 1 bomber formation saved. And the most fundamental tactical assumption of P-38 combat operations had just been shattered. Within 24 hours, Major General George Kenney ordered a classified analysis. Test pilots at Wright Field in Ohio received Carmichael's flight data. Their response was cautious, almost hostile. Lieutenant Carmichael's profile indicates sustained flight in prohibited compressibility envelope, multiple split-S executions at speeds known to cause control surface failure. Recovery should not have been possible without dive recovery flaps. We cannot recommend this technique be taught. The risks exceed acceptable parameters. This engagement represents survivorship bias, not replicable tactical doctrine. But the recommendation came too late. Carmichael's wingman had watched the entire engagement. So had 6 other P-38 pilots maintaining altitude above the fight. By the time the test pilots at Wright Field wrote their cautious memo, every P-38 squadron in the 5th Air Force knew the details. The forbidden split S worked, not in theory, in combat, against 90 Zeros, 5 times, in 92 seconds, 9 kills, 0 losses. The technique began spreading through informal networks. Experienced pilots shared the critical factors. First, enter the split S with precise speed control, below 320 miles per hour, if possible. Build speed in the dive. Don't start fast. Second, use trim aggressively as speed increased. Nose up trim, compensated for elevator stiffness. The stabilizers remained effective even when the elevators froze. Third, monitor indicated airspeed religiously. Each P-38 had slightly different limits based on weight, altitude, specific airframe tolerances. Learn your aircraft, know its edge. Fourth, begin recovery early, 4,000 feet, minimum above terrain or target altitude, at 430 miles per hour. In a 60-degree dive, you covered 1,000 feet in less than 2 seconds. Hesitation. Killed. The 5th Air Force couldn't officially sanction the tactic. Technical Order 0175 F1 remained in effect, but informal training began. Senior pilots took new arrivals on orientation flights where they demonstrated split-S maneuvers under controlled conditions, not explicitly, not in violation of orders, just showing what the aircraft could do when pushed, when necessary, when survival demanded it. The message was clear. The manual is conservative for good reasons. Men died, proving those reasons valid. But combat sometimes requires operating at the edge. Sometimes the edge is safer than following doctrine. Sometimes forbidden maneuvers save lives. Japanese intelligence didn't adapt quickly enough. For 6 weeks after Carmichael's engagement, Zero pilots continued using the split S as their primary escape maneuver. It had worked for 20 months, hundreds of successful escapes, 0 losses attributable to P-38 pilots following them through inverted dives. The tactical assumption was as solid as any in the Pacific War. Americans wouldn't follow the split S. Couldn't follow it. The technical limitations were absolute. Until they weren't. American kill ratios improved dramatically. The 475th Fighter Group reported that successful zero escapes via split S maneuvers dropped from 58% to 14% between late October and mid-December 1943. The 49th Fighter Group documented 19 engagements where P-38s pursued diving zeros through split S maneuvers and achieved kills in 16. The 18th Fighter Group, operating from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, recorded similar results. Zeros that executed split S escapes were being shot down consistently, reliably. By mid-December, Japanese tactical bulletins acknowledged the change. A document captured at Rabul in February 1944, translated by Allied intelligence officers, contained explicit new guidance for Zero pilots. The twin-engine American fighter now follows aggressive split S maneuvers and inverted dives. Previous escape techniques are no longer effective. Avoid engagement when enemy possesses altitude advantage. Do not execute split S unless altitude exceeds 4,000 meters. Recommend disengagement via hard turns at low altitude where twin-engine fighter cannot follow. The advice was tactically sound, but operationally devastating. If Zeros couldn't safely engage P-38s with altitude, they couldn't effectively intercept high-flying bombers. If the split S no longer guaranteed escape, Japanese pilots had lost their most reliable disengagement tactic. The psychological impact was severe. Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's highest-scoring aces, wrote after the war, in late 1943, the Lightning changed. Before, we could always escape by diving away. The Americans would not follow. Then, suddenly they followed. We lost many experienced pilots who executed standard escape maneuvers and were shot down in dives they thought were safe. The Lightning destroyed the morale of the Zero fighter pilot. The long-term solution arrived in December 1943 for field modifications, June 1944 for factory installation. Dive recovery flaps. Lockheed engineers designed electrically actuated flaps mounted under the wing center section. When deployed above 300 miles per hour, they disrupted the airflow, causing compressibility. Test results were dramatic. P-38s could now dive to 520 miles per hour, indicated, and retain full control authority. The elevator remained effective. Tuck under was eliminated. The split S became a standard maneuver, officially sanctioned, taught in training, documented in tactical bulletins, but installation took months. Retrofit kits had to reach forward bases in New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, the Admiralty Islands. Mechanics had to install them under field conditions with improvised tools and inadequate lighting. The modified P-38s, designated P-38J-25, and later models, didn't reach full distribution until March 1944. For 4 months from late October 1943 to late February 1944, the P-38's effectiveness in the Pacific depended on pilots willing to operate outside official limits. They called it riding the edge, flying faster than the manual allowed, but slower than physics forbade. The margin was narrow, measured in miles per hour of airspeed and degrees of dive angle. 15 miles per hour too fast and the controls froze completely. 10 degrees too steep and tuck under became unrecoverable. The difference between survival and death fit inside the width of a throttle movement. The tactic destroyed more than 400 Japanese aircraft that would have escaped under previous doctrine. It also killed 18 American pilots in compressibility-related accidents between October 1943 and February 1944. 18 men who pushed past the edge, who misjudged their altitude or their airspeed or their aircraft's specific tolerances. Who proved that the technical orders, while conservative, were based on real physics and real danger. Daniel Carmichael flew 43 more combat missions between October 1943 and March 1944. He executed the split-S maneuver in combat 27 additional times. He survived everyone. His final tally, 18 confirmed kills, 11 probables. He received the Distinguished Service Cross for the October 27th engagement, though the citation carefully avoided mentioning split S maneuvers or technical order violations. The medal recognized extraordinary heroism and exceptional aerial combat skill, without specifying the tactical innovation that made the kills possible. The Army Air Forces faced a bureaucratic dilemma. Carmichael had violated explicit technical orders multiple times, deliberately, but his violations had demonstrably saved bomber crews, destroyed enemy aircraft, and proved tactically superior to authorized procedures. Court-martial proceedings were quietly initiated, then quietly suspended. No formal charges appeared in his service record, no official reprimand, no acknowledgement that anything irregular had occurred. In March 1944, Carmichael's P-38H received factory-installed dive recovery flaps during a maintenance overhaul. The modification made split S maneuvers officially safe. But Carmichael knew something the engineers didn't quite grasp. He'd been executing split S maneuvers safely for 4 months without the flaps. The flaps expanded the margin. They made the technique accessible to average pilots. But the technique had always been possible for those willing to learn the edge. He rotated home to the United States in April 1944 after completing his combat tour. He became an instructor pilot at Muroc Army Airfield in California, training new P-38 pilots in advanced tactics. He taught split S recovery, officially now, with dive flaps. But he also taught the technique without flaps, in case the electrical system failed or battle damage disabled the mechanism. He taught pilots to feel the control column stiffening, to recognize compressibility onset, to use trim when elevators froze, to begin recovery early, to know their aircraft's edge. Post-war analysis by the Air Force Historical Research Agency calculated that P-38 kill ratios in the Pacific improved from 2.6 to 1 in early 1943 to 6.1 to 1. By early 1944, multiple factors contributed: better tactics, improved maintenance, more experienced pilots, superior aircraft variants. But the elimination of the split S restriction appeared repeatedly in pilot debriefs as a critical tactical advantage. The ability to follow diving enemy aircraft, to pursue them through maneuvers that had previously guaranteed escape, changed the fundamental mathematics of air combat over the Pacific. The lesson influenced post-war fighter development. The F-86 Sabre, America's first swept-wing jet fighter, underwent extensive high-speed testing before operational deployment. Test pilots deliberately explored the edges of controllability at transonic speeds. The data informed not just aircraft design, but also pilot training. Future fighter pilots would be taught to recognize and manage compressibility effects rather than simply avoid them. The edge, it turned out, was where combat happened. Training pilots to operate there safely was more effective than prohibiting them from going there at all. The irony was noted by aviation historian Barrett Tillman in his 1998 study of Pacific air combat. The P-38's greatest limitation was eliminated not by engineers but by pilots who decided the risk of following doctrine exceeded the risk of breaking it. Carmichael and others proved that the Lightning was more capable than Lockheed believed. The engineers caught up 6 months later with dive recovery flaps. But for half a year, the Lightning's effectiveness depended on men willing to bet their lives that technical orders were too conservative. Some lost that bet, most won. And the Pacific Air War shifted in ways that statistics only partially capture. Today, the P-38 Lightning is remembered as one of World War II's most versatile fighters. Effective in air superiority, ground attack, reconnaissance, and long-range escort roles, but its effectiveness in late 1943, during the critical period when Japan still possessed formidable air strength in the Southwest Pacific, depended on pilots like Daniel Carmichael, who understood that sometimes survival requires breaking the rules designed to keep you safe. The forbidden split S destroyed more than 9 Japanese fighters on October 27th, 1943. It destroyed the assumption that doctrine always outweighs initiative. It destroyed the tactical certainty that Zeros could always escape by diving away. It destroyed the mathematical advantage that Japanese pilots had enjoyed for 20 months. There's a tension in military aviation between engineering caution and combat necessity. The engineers who write technical orders base restrictions on physics testing worst-case scenarios. They're protecting pilots from aircraft limitations that can kill without warning. Their caution is justified. It saves lives. Technical Order 0175F1 prohibiting split-S maneuvers and high-speed dives in the P-38 was written in blood. Ralph Verdon's blood. The blood of pilots who'd pushed past the edge and proved the edge was real. But combat introduces variables engineers can't test. Enemy aircraft diving away. Bombers under attack. Moments where the risk of inaction exceeds the risk of breaking limits. In those moments, pilots must decide whether to trust the manual or trust their understanding of the machine beneath them. Daniel Carmichael chose to trust the machine. He executed splits maneuvers at 451 miles per hour, indicated because 90 Zeros were attacking, and doctrine offered no solution. He operated at the edge of compressibility because the alternative was watching enemies escape and brothers die. He proved that the P-38 Lightning could do more than Lockheed believed possible. 9 Japanese fighters destroyed in 92 seconds. 92 seconds that demonstrated the Lightning's true potential. 92 seconds that required ignoring every official restriction on inverted flight and high-speed maneuvers. October 27, 1943, 24,000 feet above Rabul, one P-38 rolling inverted into forbidden maneuvers against an enemy that believed they were safe. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a pilot can do is follow the rules. And sometimes the manual's red warnings exist not to define the limit, but to mark where courage begins. When the mission demands it, when survival requires it, when 90 enemy fighters are diving and 8 bombers need protection, doctrine is just another constraint to overcome. The engineers were right. The split-S could kill P-38 pilots. The physics of compressibility were real. The technical orders were based on legitimate danger. But the pilots were also right. The split-S could be flown safely. The edge could be learned. And, sometimes, doctrine kills more men than the maneuvers it prohibits. Daniel Carmichael survived the war. He flew commercial aviation for United Airlines from 1946 to 1978. He rarely discussed the split-S tactic, saying only, "We did what the situation required." The manual said, "Don't." The enemy said we couldn't. The mission said, "We must." I chose the mission. He died in 1994 at age 73. His Distinguished Service Cross citation, filed in the National Archives, remains one of the few official documents acknowledging that sometimes the greatest victories come not from following doctrine, but from recognizing when doctrine no longer serves its purpose. The P-38 Lightning flew its last combat mission in the Pacific Theater in August 1945. By then, dive recovery flaps were standard equipment. Split-S maneuvers were authorized tactics. The edge had been measured, tested, documented. But for 4 months, in late 1943 and early 1944, before the engineers solved the problem, pilots solved it first, with trim tabs and courage and precise understanding of where the edge was, with willingness to bet their lives that they understood their aircraft better than the technical orders did. Some lost that bet. 18 names on casualty lists marked as aircraft lost to compressibility-induced control failure. But hundreds won, 400 Japanese aircraft destroyed, dozens of bomber formations protected, countless lives saved by pilots who decided that forbidden maneuvers were less dangerous than following doctrine that no longer matched reality. October 27, 1943. 90 Zeros diving from 28,000 feet, one pilot rolling inverted into the forbidden splits. 9 kills in 92 seconds. The engagement that rewrote the tactical manual and proved that sometimes survival demands you write your own rules. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.